Hi, I'm Dr. Frank Renito, Chief Scientist with the Institute for Digital Transformation. I want to welcome you to Digital Dialogue, where different industry experts discuss digital transformation topics and issues that are of concern to all businesses. Whether you are already a digital enterprise, or on your journey, or still trying to figure out what that all means, we know you'll find something here for you. Remember, as a LinkedIn Live session, this is your opportunity to interact with these experts. Post your comments and questions in chat for a full interactive experience. Welcome to Digital Dialogue.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whatever time zone you happen to find yourself in or location you might be. My name is Ken Gonzalez. I will be your moderator for today's panel discussion on designing compelling experiences. Very happy to have you here, and I've brought together a very astute group of individuals I'm sure you'll get a lot of insight from. First off, Jeff Tefertiller, welcome. And if you wouldn't mind to just say a few words about yourself.
Jeffrey Tefertiller. I know Ken took a valiant effort, but Jeffrey Tefertiller, I've been in the digital transformation space for a couple, 3 decades. Enjoy the discussion, the dialogue. I don't think we have these discussions enough, so I'm looking forward to it. And I thank Ken for including me in this.
It's a pleasure to have you here. Absolutely. Our next panelist is the esteemed Mr. Hank Marquis. Welcome, Hank.
Thanks, Ken. Hey, thanks for that. I have to start with a disclaimer. I work for Gartner as an executive partner, which is a lot like an IT leadership coach, but here I represent myself. These are my own opinions. This is me talking and not Gartner. Having said that, I'm really happy to be here today. This is a passion of mine. I've been a technology executive for 25 years, focused on this very topic, and went back and got a PhD in organizational leadership to learn about something called psychometrics, which I'll be referring to today. So IT satisfaction and productivity and all the rest of it. But I'm in New Hampshire. I have a plow truck. I like to ski and kayak, and that's nice if there's you live someplace with a lot of snow. And I drink lots of coffee. So thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
That's something we both share. So welcome, Hank. It's great to have you here. And last but certainly not least, Mr. Larry Cooper.
Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, good evening, as Ken said. I'm, I guess, a little odd in this group because I'm in Canada as opposed to the US, the nation's capital. I've been in IT for 47 years. How's that? Started in 1978. So I've seen a lot of change over the years. This is sort of the latest incantation of change. And one of the interesting things that, for me at least, is how we've kind of changed our perspective and approach towards how we do strategy, and taking a more holistic view and coming at it more from a discovery approach as opposed to a planning approach. And so I think in the context of digital transformation and so on, I think that's kind of an important thing to keep in mind as we have this conversation.
Excellent. Well, glad that I wouldn't call you our token Canadian, but it's nice to have our partners up north represented, and we're certainly glad you're here. And thank you to all of you. I really appreciate your taking the time to spend some time with us and talk through this important topic. This is one that's actually been very personally meaningful for me. And I've neglected to say that, and most of you who are here, probably on one of the invites I've made. I'm a former Gartner analyst and advisor, and with the literally thousands of conversations I've had with customers, experience design is truly one of those incredible sources of leverage that I don't think is being really taken advantage of as much as it can or should be. Now, the title of the session is Designing Compelling Experiences, and I'm going to start off with you guys and asking you the question, what do you consider to be a compelling experience? What should people be on the lookout for what are the characteristics associated with a compelling experience? So Larry, let's start with you.
Sure. Thank you, Ken. And it's a pleasure to be here. I guess, like the first thing I would say, the compelling experience depends on context. It's going to vary depending on which organization you're in, which sector you're in, and so on as to what that means. And so I kind of think it sort of rolls back to starting with how compelling the organization's why is, and whether it's clear to everybody as to why that organization exists, who it exists to serve, and so on. And every organization is made up of people, and so whether it's customers or employees or whoever, it's really about how emotionally attached they are to that organization, because that determines their motivation and level of engagement. And the other part about it is how, depending on how the organization functions, it also determines what level of decisions people can make throughout the organization. And I think that has a huge effect on how they're engaged, how they project, and if that's sort of throughout the entire organization and out into the customer base, then it can be very positive in terms of the experience that everybody has, or it can be not so positive. So that's kind of how I would set the stage for that.
Excellent. I really like your notion of, and being able to bring into this the notion of the compelling why. Because if you don't have the compelling why, it seems like it would be rather difficult to frame what a compelling experience would actually look like. Jeff, how about you, sir? What's your thoughts on this?
First of all, I think that we as an industry have fallen into the trap that we think that we know what other people's experiences should be and are. And so first of all, I want to throw that out the window that I can't say what Hank's experience should be or is. And we in IT, we try to say that. And so let me just start that. So when we talk about compelling, it's compelling to whom? And it's not compelling to the people who are sending out the sentiment survey. Who cares? It's more about those who we want to understand their experiences. And then let me layer on that we must understand their expectations, because their expectations drive their experience. And so when we talk about a compelling experience, we're talking about one that is known, one that is improved, and one that is measured. And take a step further, one that is acted upon. Because if we know someone's experience but we never act on it, then it's really not compelling to them. And so lastly, what is compelling today may or may not be what's compelling tomorrow. So we always have to have this improvement mindset, because we know human behavior, and Hank talks about this often, so I don't want to steal any of his thunder. But if we look at what is good today and we have those same experiences over time, they won't be viewed as good tomorrow. And so people need better experience. And so lastly, we need to consider those expectations.
Excellent. Certainly expectation management is a critical component, and I think all your points are very both timely and relevant. How about you, Hank? Hank, can you hear us?
Yeah, so I agree with some of the things that that Jeffrey and Larry said. I mean, it is important to recognize that it is important to recognize that experience has several meanings. But for example, IT experience is technically satisfaction over time, and satisfaction is a point in time, like of an interaction. So not everyone really understands that, especially most sort of normal IT workers. So I guess I'd consider a compelling experience. The employees I've worked with would be one where they can do their job effortlessly when the technology just sorts of fade away, and they're able to do and complete whatever it is they're trying to do. service a customer or be able to provide information to an employee from an internal point of view. And I guess the IT leader in me says that when the workforce is satisfied with the solutions we provide them, then I guess that should lead to a compelling experience too. But there's different ways to look at it. Definitely, it's perspective driven.
Gotcha. Excellent comments. So many people would think, and it's actually quite common here in industry to go through and consider that the dealing or wanting to create a compelling experience would mean that, oh yes, so we're going to start thinking about metrics, journey mapping, or some other technique to drive the work. And this may or may not be a great place to start for certain organizations. So my question to each of you is, what other factors should they consider? What are the elements that they need to target? And what things are easily or commonly overlooked? Jeff, let's start with you. What do you think?
So I love the thought of us talking about designing experiences. I think that's an awesome discussion for us to talk about what's overlooked, because we jump straight into solution and execution because we're in IT and we think we know what's best, right? But I want to take a step back. Because it amazes me on a lot of fronts when we jump straight into design without even talking to these users and stakeholders. We have to understand their desired outcomes. We have to understand what they want from these experiences and design accordingly. Just like we would gather requirements, if we're doing an IT implementation, a different type of transformation, we need to have these conversations for requirements. We need to talk to these stakeholders, understand what they want, what do they need, and lastly, what do they value? Because what they want and need may change, but their value is doing well, is going to be the North Star. And then design and measure, whether or not we achieve that. I think that is one of the things that we overlook, talking to our stakeholders, users first, and then moving into design. Because we all want to design. We're all in IT for that reason. We love to design new solutions.
Well, an interesting point that you bring up here is the notion of value. And I want to go back to a point that you brought up in your previous response, which is whose experience, and so value to who?
It's always value into the person whose experience we want to understand. We want to make decisions off of. So it's our stakeholders, our users, our consumers. And the reason I say stakeholders broadly, because there are many within an IT organization that are not users and consumers that still we need to understand their sentiment, their experiences, their expectations in terms of value and outcomes.
It's quite common for people to approach this from the perspective of the value to the provider organization,
Right.
Not necessarily value to the consumer. And if we respect the relationship, we need to consider that both actually need to receive value. It can't just be one-sided.
And I appreciate you saying the experience of the provider, because that's one thing we also miss too, right? Because we're so laser focused on the user and consumers, and we need to then also understand from the provider point of view.
And we're seeing lots of great comments come in from our participants who are joining us live. So thank you for that. We really appreciate it. So let's go to Larry next.
Yeah, so it's one of the challenges, and some of the examples you gave there, around metrics and journey mappings and things like that, as Jeffrey says, we kind of tend to think at the solution end of it, as opposed to recognizing that we don't know what we don't know, right? And oftentimes what we do is we'll use all of these prescribed methods we have for getting to an answer, right? And so as opposed to taking more of a discovery approach where we, plan a little, design a little, build a little, test a little, and what we're looking for is evidence. So to say, if we don't understand what's happening, whether it's with our employees or with our customers or with our suppliers or whomever. If we start making assumptions going into it as to, as Jeffrey says, as to what they actually want, right, then we're probably going to end up in the wrong place. So, I think taking more of an evidence-based approach and doing it in small increments, as opposed to, saying we're going to digitally transform, we're going to run this big project, and the world is going to be good when we're done. Well, it never works that way. It never really has, right? So, so I think that's kind of the biggest thing is to take that into account. And as far as what's overlooked, I think, I'll go back to a comment I made earlier about I think one of the big things we often overlook when we're trying to change things is to how decisions are made, right? And, I'll give you an example of a client that I was working with where they recognized they needed to change how decisions were made. They recognized how they needed to do governance. We were using a strategic discovery approach. And in the middle of it, they tell me about this project they're running, separate from all this, and using regular project approaches to define a new governance model. And they didn't kind of see the disconnect here, right? So I think that's, all of these factors are important, but it's kind of really important to understand that we really don't know what we don't know, and we need to take, that into account and change how we do things fundamentally. I saw Roy there earlier mentioning inside out, and there's inside out or outside in rather, but it's inside out and outside in, right? It's kind of got to take into account both.
Yeah, it's interesting, Larry. So from a mechanical perspective, we could actually look at the design of experience from several different levels. The strategic, the tactical, and the operational. And it seems as though a lot of times what we end up seeing from customer organizations is that they'll start with the operational, considering now, and I think rightfully so, that there's a persona that they want to be able to serve better, and they're going to look at it like at the operational level, but not necessarily connect it up through the strategic and tactical levels. Does that prompt any thoughts or comments from you?
You want to go, Jeffrey?
Oh, I was going to respond to something Larry said before, but only Ken, that when he talked about being iterative and making sure that we check in and we don't do these long transformations without an iterative measuring and understand where we were, my thought was, if you're off by 1 degree and you go a mile, you'll miss your destination by 92 feet. So if you take that over a long transformation and you never iterate or assess where you are, then let's make sure that we take those assessments, because we could take a long path and only be off 5 degrees. 5 degrees is really small, right? Like we almost hit it dead on. But if you're off 15, 20 degrees and you leave the east coast of the US, 15 to 20 degrees, you may miss Europe. You may be aiming for London. Right. But I'm just saying that if we don't reassess, we're going to get ourselves in a lot of problems. And we know our stakeholders, their needs are changing. So I apologize for jumping in there, but it made me think Larry's point that we really need to have regular check-ins. Are we still meeting the value that we need, that we're tasked to do?
Yeah, and actually just to add to that is the point that the strategy itself also needs to be questioned, right? Just because we kind of laid something out and say this is our strategic approach, but once you start, you may discover that certain parts of your strategy are way off base, right? And you need to pivot. And you need evidence, to back that decision up, but you really do need to be willing to pivot on strategy in the middle of it.
Yeah. It's changed. Think about what we've learned the last 3.5 years in terms of iterative approaches.
Yeah.
Okay. So any other comments? And Hank's having a couple technical issues with his speakers and microphones, so we'll get him back here shortly. But anything that you guys want to kick in to close out this question?
Well, I guess it just sort of hives off the first discussion that we had and a bit of this one, which is, you know, in terms of designing compelling experiences and looking at, you know, needing to look at the entire value chain, right, throughout the organization, you know, coming in, going through, and going out, right? We have to look at all of it, because every single part of it plays a role in how well everybody experiences it, right? It's you know, and the idea of looking and I, you know, the whole notion of a supply chain, right? Well, if you look at them as vendors, then it's contractual relationships, right? If you look at them as partners in creating in designing and creating a compelling experience, then it's a whole different set of conversations that you're having.
That is Larry, you read my mind where I wanted to go on this. I was just going to say, if we are wanting to design experiences, we have to make sure that our vendors, our partners, our suppliers at both ends are all included. I don't care whether we're using a service management or a SIAM or whatever type of approach, we have to have an end-to-end view of that experience.
Well, it's also interesting to think about that this is an example of a producer-consumer relationship, and it actually can be nested. So that in order for a producer to actually serve a consumer, they might actually be dependent upon somebody else that provides them underpinning elements, components, or other services that might be used in the context of being able to deliver that. So to just view it as, you know, hey, we're going to kind of ring fence something off and say, this is the thing that we're dealing with the consumer, might not necessarily get us to where we want to be, because we might not be able to satisfy what the expectation is from our consumer's part, given whatever component set that we're using in order to be able to craft that.
On that note, Ken, don't we also have to consider that these consumers may have more than one provider? And we have to understand that experience if we're seeking to understand from their point of view, we have to understand that they may have more than one provider as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. About a dozen or so years ago, I wrote a paper on an ITSM site on service level agreements. And the way I kind of positioned it was that whole notion of a set of nested relationships, right? So, yeah, you know, your supplier or a provider has their set of relationships, and each one of those have their set of relationships, right? And it all has to work, right? And if we kind of don't understand, you know, that it may not be, for example, that a particular provider is not willing to do something, it's that they're dependent on someone else and they're not doing it, right? And so, you know, it kind of changes how you look at things, and, you know, and also can affect, you know, what you can do about it. Yeah. Both in a short run, but also in the long run of kind of figuring out, you know, where do we go from here kind of thing.
So now it's clear from the comments that I've heard so far that there's a general understanding that value is a pretty common orientation. And certainly I don't think anybody here would argue the importance of being able to establish a value proposition. But it seems that any experience design work that we would want to do that does not address level of satisfaction is likely to come up short. So my question to you guys is, number one, what is commonly meant or understood when people say satisfaction is important? That can include, do you have a working definition of satisfaction that others would find useful? Or what can people do to target satisfaction? So with that, let's start off with Larry.
Well, I guess I sort of look at it rather simplistically, which is that if customers like what you do, or employees like what you do, or providers, consumers like what you do, then you're probably doing something right, right? And so, and the other part, and this is kind of stealing a little bit from Hank, which is it kind of has to be philosophy more than measurement. And I think that goes, but that goes to a lot of things. That when we look at it, it's like, well, we want happy employees, or we want higher quality, and think whatever the thing is that we're striving for. If you approach it as philosophy as opposed to a set of prescribed things, then you open your thinking up to being able to change on the fly based on what you're finding, right? About what works and what doesn't, and what you've learned along the way. So that would be my simplistic definition.
Okay. So, and just to be sure that Hank is back with us fully, the question to the panelists is, what is meant or commonly understood when people say satisfaction is important? Do you have a working definition of satisfaction others might find useful? And what can people do to target satisfaction? So with that, Hank, I'm going to toss this one to you.
Thanks a lot for that, and thank goodness that I guess whatever they were doing outside stopped. So, so what is meant by satisfaction? I mean, to me, it's a lagging indicator, right? I mean, so satisfaction is a signal. I think about it diagnostically, like a physician or something like that, right? So when someone is dissatisfied, then that means that things are damaged already. It's it's like, hey, this hurts. It's like a person saying that. So and that means that confidence of the employee is lost in us, engagement is probably dropping, productivity is falling, profits, loyalty, customers. I mean, it's all bad. So I mean, there's and most unfortunately, I don't think most IT leaders sort of look at it that way. But they probably should. So I think so when I think about satisfaction, that's what it means to me.
Yeah. And I like the point that you're making here of satisfaction being a lagging indicator. And really, this kind of plays into the notion of most of the metrics I find that a lot of the leaders I've worked with have been using have been lagging indicators. So if you're trying to anticipate what you need to do to be able to improve an experience for someone, something that is truly compelling, that would engage, that would motivate them, that would energize them, if you're not paying attention to the right things, then you're not going to be able to tell whether or not it's actually having the intended effect of actually enhancing that experience.
That's right. Well, and Ken, the funny thing about that is that that's so seldom understood. So think about this. When you overspend and do more than you should, polish the apple, bells and whistles, you actually begin to dissatisfy employees. So there's a range. There's it's actually got a name in psychometrics and in 𝗗𝗶𝗶𝗶𝗂, which is a scientific framework for how the brain interprets and becomes satisfied, or tells you you're satisfied, right? But the zone of tolerance, right? There's an upper level and a lower level, and you want to be somewhere in the middle. And overspending is as bad as underspending. They both are going to result in dissatisfaction, which kind of blows people's minds when they're like, hey, we're just going to spend more money on it and they'll be happier. Give us some new bells and whistles. It's like, no, that's not going to do it. You got to work on the back end and make sure that you've started outside of the organization and you understand the job to be done, the business they're in. And if they're working with lawyers, specific lawyers, what does that lawyer need to receive? And then kind of work backwards into IT. That's not the way we tend to do it today. We tend to do IT to the business. We usually don't start out in the business and then come back in. And so that's where we get a lot of these satisfaction issues that you've been talking about today. In the metrics, obviously we could talk about, the problems with NPS and CES and CSAT and everything else, but there's a lot to unpack there.
So, and I think one of the key things that is a bit of something people tend to get wrong is they consider the design of experiences to be one size fits all. And when I'm either going to take on experience design or take on my consumer satisfaction, it could actually be that really the only thing you need to do is make some pain go away. Oh, it's doctor, it hurts when I go like this. Well, let me make that less painful. And then we should actually see a good correlation with what actually the user would perceive as being satisfied. Any provider has to think about something that from, and this is something I found is really missing. There's a certain level of quality, cost, and performance that goes into being able to meet somebody's needs. And we need to do that on a reliable and repeatable basis. Otherwise, they're going to be thinking about us as the gang that can't shoot straight. And the cost, quality, and performance is going to vary depending upon the importance of the service or the product being used or the application that people need to use to be able to do their job. So the thing I like about what you're saying is it gives us the opportunity to now be more choosy about where we go to work and looking for the types of things that might actually get us to the place where we want to be. Comments or thoughts on that?
I'll jump in, and I don't want to steal from everybody, but I mean everyone wants to do the best right they can. No one wakes up in the morning and goes, how can I damage the business today? I mean, there are very few of those people, right? None of us, we don't do that. So we're trying, right? So we've latched on to things. We've latched on to Net Promoter Score, which which is okay. A lot of people use it, and they've made it the corporate standard for IT and things like that. But it was developed for external use. Would you recommend me to a friend is the core question. I've worked with a lot of people with IT satisfaction work enterprises, and I've seen the results of people like that this question makes no sense to us. Like, no, I wouldn't recommend you to anybody, but there's others. There's some called customer effort score, which is really good. And it was designed for more support related. Its question is like, do we help you solve your problem today or something like that, right? But both of them are signals. No matter which one you have, they both do a fairly good job of someone waving the flag going, hey, I'm not happy. And that's what you need to seek out. You need to seek out the dissatisfied, not the super users and not the people that just love everything you're doing, right? That's not going to help you, truly improve. But those two, one or the other of those sort of pulse surveys are great. Then you have to do something more complicated. You have to really dig into it. You have to use something like some manifestation of ServQual or something that's at least looks around this framework called Radar. It's the five determinants that we use in our brain when we're on services to decide whether we like those services or not. And so so you think about a cascade like that, and now all of a sudden maybe it can become actionable. Whereas it's just a flag being waved and you don't know why, you can then drop into it. But I often find that people don't fund that. They get MPS, they outsource it to somebody, which is fine, and then they get a report card, and it's like, wow, Hank, I got this deck, and we're 67% down this month. What's going on here? I'm like, well, let's look at the comments, because that's all we can look at, because we don't have the diagnostics to be able to say, oh, it's this or it's that. So, but there's a whole missing tranche of work there in many organizations. But interestingly, the leaders I've worked with who are really knocking it out of the park, digital employee experience and so on wise, they do have a dedicated team that understands psychometrics. They have a cascading approach, and they follow that up. So it's there's a lot there. Again, there's still a lot in that, Ken.
Absolutely. So we've got a question coming up that I want to get to, but Jeff, I don't want to remove the opportunity for you to be able to respond to this. So comments.
So I think the working definition I use for CSAT or satisfaction is just how well do the product services, how well does that experience meet expectations? But I think one of the things that we do poorly is that we either look at everything at such a big scale that we can't really measure and act, or we're worried about all the onesies. And if anything in the US, our country, we can't get 100 people to agree on anything. And so I mean, it'd be hard to get 10 people to agree on anything. So we should look at the trends. We should look at how the shifts are going and realizing that there will be some people that we may have to, they've had bad experiences. We need to have that follow-up conversation with because they may be a leading indicator, as Hank says, they may be on a bleeding edge of something that we really need to understand. But we really need to understand the scope of whose experience we're really targeting.
Jeff, that's a
What's
great
that?
comment. And I want to ask you a question about that because some approaches actually advocate that you collect a lot of data in advance and then do a pretty significant amount of assessment and analyzation of the data prior to getting started. Is that actually what you're recommending?
It depends on the situation. I don't want to be pure consultant here, but at the same time, to Hank's point, if it's a lagging indicator and we collect 6 months of data and it takes us 6 months to figure it out and have a game plan, our game plan could be 6 months off. And so I would try to measure, I would try to marry what I measure and what I'm going to act on or design as close together as possible. I would not want there to be a big time lapse in between those. Does that make sense?
I think it does make sense. And the only thing I was actually trying to frame in asking the question, and you did a marvelous job of dancing around it, is that just because we've got data, it does not necessarily mean that we need to get involved in a huge effort to go through and do some data analysis. And it's not to say that you shouldn't use any data, but we want to be sure that we are, getting the right data and don't get stuck with analysis paralysis for sure.
Oh yeah. And let's be honest, all of our experience work is all predicated on how we make decisions and how we act on that data. Because if we have all this data and we make great analysis but never act on it, experience is going to go down. And so it's all about what decisions we make and how we act on it. And so that's why I'd want to have data as close to current as possible.
Excellent. So any closing comments on this question? Anybody? Okay, great. So we had a question from the audience, and we're going to get that posted up here. I'll let you read that for just a moment. This is actually a really great question, and I'm glad it was asked. So thank you, Patty. So let's start off with Hank. Do you have any question or any feedback on Patty's question here?
So Patty, it's a brilliant question because you put your finger on it. Everything is dependent on everything else. So the question becomes, where do you start? And so you wind up with so experience. I think experience is where it starts, right? And then that goes off, and then I'm productive. If I'm productive and I can get my job done, then I can engage the people I work with internally or externally. If I engage with them and I'm happy, right? You can hear it, you can feel it when someone's engaged and taking the extra step, and then that's going to make them more loyal. And then if they're buying stuff from us, maybe they'll buy more and talk good about us, and then we come right back up to the top again, right? So to me, employee experience is exactly in the middle, and that's the conversation we have to have. Because if you remember back to since version 3 of ITIL, at least in service management world, we've had the diagrams with strategy and design and transition and operation. We've had these circular motions. Just take that motion of customer satisfaction and profitability and overlay it on top of that diagram of strategy, design, transition, operation, and now you'll see how the teams interact. And if you actually build what's called a service concept, it'll tie those things together in a really nice bow tie where you've got all the information you need to make a strategic decision, which in turn you can pass to design, and they'll be able to build something that's actually right. Because we've all seen the picture of the person wants a donkey to be able to carry the coffee or something like that, and they wind up with a seahorse at the end because the strategy is wrong, the design is wrong, and then transition doesn't do it right, and then operations is left holding the bag trying to make it work and sticking it together with bubble gum. So I mean, to make people understand that, I found laying those circles on top of each other and then talking about it is a great exercise, workshop, break session, whatever you want to call it.
And then Juan Valdez will be very unhappy. So, there you go. Larry, what do you think?
Well, I guess like one of the parts of the question was around inter-team collaboration and so on. And when we're going into doing new things, one of the things I've seen over the years in a lot of organizations is they assign people to this new thing, right, to work on this new thing. And one of the challenges there is that it tends to be based on their role, which may or may not be what they're naturally good at. And we all, so the way to kind of think about it is we all have natural tendencies that really don't change much over time. So, you talk about, some people like change, some people don't like change. Well, there's actually scientific evidence to back that up, right? That some of us are more toward, the new things, discovery, that kind of stuff. That's what, gets us going in the morning. There's other people that are more towards the other end of stability and control. But the way organizations are structured in hierarchies, they tend to grab people based on where they are in the hierarchy as to where they are based on that, their natural tendencies, right? And so, like, for example, with myself, I spent, early part of my career in an operations role. And years later, I actually did an assessment where it assesses you on this and discovered that my natural tendency was actually towards the bottom of innovation and discovery, right? So now I could function in that role, right? That other role. But this was my natural place. So when you're looking at putting together teams to do new things and to discover what you don't know and to take things in a different direction, then I think there needs to be an important part of that has to be, are they, getting the right people into the right roles, right? And, you're not going to change an organization overnight. So some people who don't like change, they're, the crossing the chasm thing, Jeffrey Moore, all that thing, right? Well, market penetration, you could think of organizational change and transformation along the same line. There's different sort of transition points or pivot points along the curve when it permeates the entire organization. So how you set that up at the beginning, I think is really, really crucial.
Absolutely. Great comments. And I think it also is interesting to consider the whole, are the right people in the right role and what competencies do you need in order for this to be successful? Yeah. That's great. Jeff.
I appreciate Larry spurring my thought on the old Collins book, get the right people on the bus and put them in the right seat, right? But I was going to go a different direction than my colleagues here and say that when we talk about collaboration, we have to talk about collaboration for what, on what. And there has to be defined, this is our purpose, this is our value. And so that collaboration has bounds, it has a relationship. And I really appreciated Roy's comment in the chat that talked about feedback loops.
Yeah.
And because we have to have this common understanding of which direction we're going and have those feedback loops to make sure that everybody's on the same page, everybody's on board. But I think a lot of times we start these initiatives, we don't have everybody at the table at the beginning. Then we get halfway down, we're like, hey, we need to call Joe and Sally and get them in here and bring them along. And what we really need to do is understand at the beginning what we're doing, who's with us, and then how do we build in this feedback along the way.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent, Jeff. So just as the closer to this question, one thing I'll kick in here is the thing I took away from Patty's question is it's quite common to experience it's like, oh, we believe this is our area, so we're going to lead the design on it. That may or may not work out well. And I think one of the key things that we need to develop from an organizational perspective is how we actually bring people together to work under a common context to be able to design the experience. And in doing so, you don't necessarily want to take on either the easiest thing that you've ever done or the hardest thing that you've ever done. Rather, you want to get something that's reasonably sized where you can begin the process of engagement and then actually work out the mechanics of how the different teams and stakeholders are actually going to work together to be able to move an initiative forward. It's a little bit more art than science, but it does require that everybody come together with the intention that they actually start, seeing some results and learning the way that you need to do things as your unique way of fulfilling this intention as an organization. And if you do that, then it's likely you're going to start to build that organizational muscle memory about how to sustainably and really thoroughly build that organic capability. So, been great so far. And the thing I'd like to end our session with here is there any one or two key pieces of advice that you would offer our participants about how to have a better shot at designing a compelling experience? And I'm going to start off with Jeff.
All right. I appreciate it. In closing, I enjoyed this conversation. I appreciate our audience and Ken and everyone. So I wanted to make sure I said how much I thank you all for inviting me. But the piece of advice, talk to your users, talk to your stakeholders, understand their experiences. Until you do this, the rest doesn't matter. We can design anything we want, but until we talk to them, it doesn't matter. There's no way also that a technology can understand a stakeholder or user experience. Technology cannot measure that. And so experience and satisfaction are a function of expectations, and we must address the expectations and then the experiences.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. And over to Larry.
Actually, I think Jeff said it quite nicely.
Okay, great. And Hank, why don't you bring us home?
So it is personal, as Jeff said, and I take it to even another level. I call it leading with satisfaction, which is where it's what you do as a leader. Your questions are about, well, what business are we in, or what's the business value, or someone says, gee, the network is down and it's this and it's that, and so, well, okay, so how is the business impacted? So asking the questions about what the impact of the dissatisfaction or whatever the issue is on the business, and then working backwards, right? Versus just getting sucked into the technology. So it is personal, as Jeffrey said, and at the same time, it's not just talking to people, but it's also always talking about satisfaction and the impact of not having satisfied or dissatisfaction, and leading with that. Just it's kind of like that. If you lead with satisfaction, as I write about in often, it's like a compass. It's your true north. It's going to point you in a direction. And if you're always thinking about satisfaction and how to get it and what the impact is, that's going to draw you naturally into conversations. It'll pull you in a direction. You'll think about tools, technology, people, process differently. So that's it. And I agree with Larry on his comment as well. So, and also thanks a lot for having me. Sorry for any technical issues. It was great. And you all know how to reach us. And it was great to be here. Very happy. Thank you.
Excellent, Hank. Thanks for providing that. And I really love the thought of leading with satisfaction, because I think at the end of the day, leaders that aren't doing that are really painting targets on their back, saying, hey, replace me with somebody that knows how to do this. Because at the end, the trust and the confidence that consumers place in their providers is what's going to make the difference between success and failure. So thanks to each of you for joining us and being participants. It's been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed it, and I hope our audience has been too. So with that, thank you, audience, for joining us today. I hope you found this valuable. Feel free to engage with the Institute as well as each of us on LinkedIn. We certainly look forward to hearing about your comments, any follow-on questions you might have, and hope you have a great rest of your day. And we look forward to talking to you soon. So take care.
Thank you for joining our digital dialogue. Be sure to join our next digital dialogue on the first and third Tuesdays of every month.